is very good.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cricket Podcast with me, Jack Hope, and Ross Legg. How are you doing, Ross? Did you have a Merry Christmas?
Yeah, hi Jack. I had a wonderful Christmas. Spent watching the cricket actually, so it was great that cricket's on the other side of the world. So it's not you don't have to live. You don't have to spend too much time with your family. You can sit and enjoy the cricket and be a little bit pissed. It's quite good. How about you?
Yes. Similarly, it's probably the one time of the year where it's you can catch a reasonable amount of the cricket that goes on down under and not have to worry about it compromising work performance and so on. So you can watch a whole session, safe in the knowledge that you can sleep until midday the next day. And that's what we'll be talking about today. There are 3 Boxing Day tests that took place and have now concluded. In the first one, India overcame Australia. In the second, New Zealand bested Pakistan. And in the third, South Africa crushed Sri Lanka. Ross, you said you enjoyed the cricket. Was there a particular test that stood out to you of those 3?
I just thought there was some good individual performances that no doubt we'll talk about, but it was nice to see the evergreen Faf du Plessis smash around some pie chuckers. Kane Williamson just showed, again, that he's just different gravy compared to everybody else. And I think the India-Australia one is always good to kind of wake up to and follow around, because it's not England getting smashed, and also it's not Australia smashing someone. So it's a good mixture at the moment, I think. Yeah,
I thought they were 3 reasonably interesting games. In addition to that, the ICC have provided us with some free content. They've released their various Best of the Decade awards. So in the final part of the show, we'll be taking a look over them and saying where we disagree. Before we get into all of that, though, Ross, the first question of this week is, what is your New Year's resolution?
Yeah, in cricket terms, or just in general?
Well, let's have both. I assumed that as a member of the Cricket Podcast and as a member of I Don't Like Cricket Club, your life would be more or less solely focused at this point on cricket. So I didn't think I needed to make that distinction. But
yeah, no, I think my news obviously get an IDLCC tattoo. That's number 1 on the list. Get that done straight out the bat. Cricket Podcast on the other bicep, just to show where my allegiance truly lies.
Well, that's good. It's free advertising for the show, isn't it?
Yeah, well, maybe we can convince Max to get the Cricket Podcast on his face somewhere, and we'll see what that can do there. In terms of the cricket New Year's resolution, I think I'm probably going to put a pin in bowling. I think I'm going to actually try and just do some more wicket keeping. I think for the IDLCC, I think it's something that we need as a team, and I think my bowling is not something we need as a team. So.
For people who don't know, IDLCC is I Don't Like Cricket Club, which is, well, in a sense, the cricket team of the podcast. We play about 10, 15 games a summer, and we're not very good. And we're particularly bad at wicket keeping. So that's good news. Ross can play a bit, so that's it's good that someone with coordination will be behind the stumps. My New Year's resolution, I think to play some cricket. That's one, to make sure that we have some games, to make sure they're fun. To be honest,
isn't a New Year's resolution? Isn't a New Year's resolution to do something you haven't been doing beforehand? So you've just said to organise some cricket, which is definitely your job, and then two is to make sure it's enjoyable, is also your job already. And I think some people would say they enjoy cricket, really.
Well, it's stick to what you're good at.
New Year's resolution, more of the same.
Yeah, I think the whole concept of a New Year's resolution is stupid. There you go. There's my true thoughts. Maybe I'll write some more about cricket. I did that a couple of times last year, and maybe I'll do some more.
Lovely.
Right. Ross, is there anything we need to tell our listeners?
Yes, dear valued listener, you should follow us on all social media, which is on Instagram and Twitter. We don't have Facebook, at The Cricket Pod. And also subscribe, follow, review, if you'd like, on iTunes and any podcast platform that you listen to us on.
Yeah, we did have another 5-star review came in this week. From Dylan Lenny, wishing us a happy 2021. So, a happy 2021 to you too, sir. The other thing we should mention, you can go back and listen to our quiz of the year if you want on last week's Christmas special. And we had Jared Kimber on the week before that. So if you haven't had enough cricket podcast by the end of this show, our last 2 episodes have got chunks of the episode which are basically timeless. They'll be good tomorrow. They'll be good next week. They'll be good next year. If that's your bag.
And we'll even sell it to the ICC in a decade's time. We're going, could we have a 2020 quiz? Oh, the Cricket Podcast have got one for you.
Right, we'll take a short break and then we will be back with Australia v India.
South Africa have made a real mess of this. And Donald's run out, and Australia are in the final. The match is being tied. What a mix-up.
South Africa to spin. They're down on their knees.
Unbelievable. How on earth did South Africa make a mess of that?
Bharti had been given a message of 2-9.
Yes, it's Australia versus India, and after India were bowled out for their lowest ever test total of 36 the week before, it was time for India to step up and try and avoid a whitewash. With Virat Kohli being absent, Aussies with the wind in their sails, this was the crunch match. If they lose it here, then 4-0 is definitely going to happen. I was reading an article on The Guardian by Jeff Lemon who said that Kohli was swapping his teammates for a newborn baby, presumably thinking it had less chance of shitting itself, which I thought was quite an apt way of discussing this India team. But the opposite happened here. Rahane stepped up as the skipper and has taken quite a lot of the plaudits, actually, in what was a pretty staggering victory, especially as Australia won the toss and chose to bat. Jack, did you catch any of the cricket at all? Any of the highlights?
Yeah, mainly what I did, I think I watched the first session of 3 of the days and picked up most of the highlights. I was surprised. I was quite surprised. I think last week, and maybe even the week before, I said this was going to be 4-0 to Australia. We went through all the reasons why India would be weaker this week. They had a debutant bowler. Their best batsman had gone home. We thought David Warner was coming back for Australia. Warner obviously didn't come back, but still... the captain and best batsman gone. The only batsman on their team who I think averages more than 35 away from home. A big loss, and they deliver the turnaround. I mean, if the ICC had waited just one more week, they could have had the turnaround match of the decade, and this could have been a contender because they really got off the canvas after posting, well, the worst score by a major cricketing nation in 55 years or 65 years or something like that, to come back and win comfortably, really. I think they controlled the whole game.
I was going to say those exact words. They controlled it and they outplayed Australia in every facet of the game. They fielded better, they batted better, they bowled better. And it was quite interesting where how different the captaincy styles were from Rahane to Kohli. And I think in Indian cricket, I think in any cricket, when it comes to captaincy, there's always the overhang of anyone you're replacing, so that you're kind of always judged against those standards. So Kohli's quite an intense character. He's very competitive, very, very fiery, and people potentially might have wanted to see that from Rahane, but actually they saw a completely different side. He was a very attacking captain. He was very calm, very collected, and I thought he did extremely well. When they lost the toss, I mean, lesser teams have definitely crumbled after going, oh no, we're going to have to bowl out here for 2.5 days, watch Australia hit 400 against us, maybe 500. But here, attacking straight away, a great use of the leg slip and the leg gully to get rid of Steve Smith and Marnus Labuschagne, and then comes out to bat, registers 112 runs to get them a pretty substantial lead, and all of a sudden they're in complete control. But this is without Mohammad Shami, Ishant Sharma, Bhuvneshwar Kumar. They've got
Rohit Sharma.
Yeah, it's a depleted India side. Yes, it's a depleted India side, and they were led fantastically. What I did find interesting was they must have listened to the podcast, the India selectors, because they changed the lineup. They got rid of Ridham Saha, they got rid of Prithvi Shaw. In comes Shrubman Gill, who batted fantastically on debut. I think it was 35 and 45 that he got, both not out. Yadav went down injured 3 overs into the second innings, and that's almost a death sentence in some games. And yet Jadeja bowled fantastically and Ashwin bowled fantastically, along with Siraj.
Yeah, no, I think basically they're all good points. Rahane had the best game by an away captain in Australia, and probably the best day by an away captain in Australia since Andrew Strauss in 2010, when England bowled out Australia for 95 at the MCG as well, and then Strauss came out to bat and scored loads of runs. It was a complete captain's performance, and I think you just look at the pace that Australia scored at. I think in both innings they scored at 2 or less than 2 and over. They basically could not get going, and that a large part of that is the use of the bowlers, particularly Ashwin, who bowled about 5,000 overs in that match for about 1 and over. Jadeja as well. We should mention a couple of things with Jadeja. Jadeja obviously ran out Rahane in the first innings. If that had been Kohli would have gone ballistic, I think, at that point. But Rahane, he tapped Jadeja on the shoulder and sort of said, carry on, keep going, you're batting well. Jadeja scored a few more runs, but I mean, India were eventually rolled. Mm-hmm. But I think that kind of set the tone for a more inclusive India side there. Jadeja himself, ever since Sanjay Manjrekar called him a bits and pieces player, has basically been the best all-format all-rounder in the world. So, obviously responding to adversity pretty well there. I think at this point in his career, he is the 6th best all-rounder ever if you look at run differential as the indicator, which is what a lot of people do. So how much higher is his batting average than his bowling average? I think he sits 6th at that. There's probably some reasons why he isn't the 6th best all-rounder of all time. Mm-hmm. But he's clearly good. Clearly good, and clearly having a good series. Australia, where do you think it went wrong for them, Ross?
Well, Steve Smith has got to be a worry for them. After hitting back-to-back centuries of, 52 balls, I think it was, or 62 balls, in the ODI series, you kind of thought, oh no, they're going to be up against Steve Smith, who is ICC's kind of golden boy when it comes to Test cricket. And yet he scored 10 runs in 4 innings. I don't think Travis Head is actually a Test quality player. They keep on picking him, and they might be because they don't have anyone else. But he's got a little bit of
James Vince to him, I think. Travis Head. He looks the part, but keeps getting out to balls that are 4 foot wide of off stump. You don't really need to play at in Test cricket. I mean, in at a lower level, when the ball's 80 miles an hour, or it's not going to move or do anything unexpected, you can kind of dangle your bat out there, and it's probably 4 runs. But weirdly, you can't do that in Test cricket, even though it is a bad ball. It's a bad ball because it's not threatening. It's not a bad ball because you can punish it. In my opinion, anyway. And I think that's a problem for him.
No, I think you're right, and it's that bit where how many opportunities you get to bat at 6 and bat at 5, get starts, and then not cash in. Australia in these bits, you need to go on and be hitting 100, 150 to kind of cement that place. I was impressed with Cameron Green, who actually looks pretty decent, but at the top of the order, that's where their main issue is, right? Matthew Wade stepping in. You've got Burns, who can't really buy a run. He hit a 50 when they were chasing 36 with no pressures on. Well done, mate. But you've also got I think in his last 8 innings, he's got 7 single-digit scores. David Warner is going to come back, which is good news for Australia. So is the guy who loves to be concussed, Bukowski. Is that his name?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Will Bukowski, or Bukowski, I think is
Bukowski. But I think one of their major issues is that Matthew Wade is a complete dickhead, actually. And I mean, Australians might like him, but I think I really like Rishabh Pant. Big fan of Rishabh Pant. And I like the battle between players. But Wade, did you see him? He was caught on the stump mic just having a go at Rishabh Pant. Do you see this?
Yeah, I did. I didn't really pick up what he was saying. I couldn't hear that.
So he said that he's saying that Pant's a bit big-headed, and he liked the fact that Pant was kind of up on the big screen at the MCG, and he was like, mate, why don't you concentrate on your cricket instead of looking at yourself on the fucking big screen? And was just kind of giving it to him. I don't mind if I like that side of things. I always enjoy that stuff. But what you can't then do is miss a spin delivery from Ashwin. Kind of what goes past him. He loses his balance, and then almost half squares up to Pant.
Yeah, that was weird.
Pant doesn't even bat an eyelid, just starts laughing at him. Wade gets increasingly annoyed and then gets out for 40. Matthew Wade, you're not good enough to give that kind of chat, mate. Go back down the order and sort yourself out. That's what I was going to say to that.
Yeah, well, I don't think he will be, though. I mean, I think Will Bukowski, because he's got a concussion and it's his 10th concussion, I'm not sure he'll be back for the next test. So I think it might be Wade and Warner opening again, and they'll probably not be able to get rid of Travis Head.
Do you reckon that would be the smallest opening partner, or the most diminutive opening partnership of all time? The small man syndrome coming out of that changing room is going to be pretty fierce. I think away from the individuals, their big thing here is obviously the batting. Their bowling unit is fine. There is nothing wrong with Australia's bowling unit, but even the best bowling units in the world are going to struggle to defend 195 and 200 at the MCG. It's too easy.
Yeah. No, you need at least. I mean, if you're at the MCG, you need at least one score of 400 to be in the game, I think. And if both your scores don't add up to 400, you're almost certainly going to lose that cricket match. Looking forward to the next two tests then, because I'm not sure there's much left to talk about in that one. We think it's probably the end of Burns, don't we?
Yeah. It's great. It's great for the test series. If it went 2-0 Australia, you'd just say, oh no, it's going to be a horrible, horrible thing. But actually, the series is alive. It's fantastic. Rohit Sharma is coming back, I think, for the third test.
We think so, yeah. So looking forward to the next test. It's in Sydney. Sydney obviously had a COVID outbreak this week, and there was some questions about whether the third test would be played in Melbourne again. But I think the Australian government this morning, or UK this morning, said that it was okay for the match to go ahead in Sydney and for there to be crowds, which is good. What do you expect to happen? So we definitely did not expect India to bounce back and comprehensively beat Australia. Do we think that they can do that again, or is it Australia's turn for a comeback?
So am I right in saying that the MCG kind of offers a bit more for the spin bowlers compared to the other pitches?
I don't know if that's necessarily true. My feelings about the MCG are it's the worst pitch in Australia. It's just flat and dull and a little bit lifeless. This wasn't as bad as it has been sometimes, but it was still obviously quite hard to score runs out there. I think that the SCG is normally the one that spins a little bit more. But again, because of climate change and because there's so many drop-in pitches in Australia now, it's harder than I think it used to be to look back and say that's the pitch that spins and that's the pitch that seams.
Fair enough.
I mean, broadly speaking, Adelaide moves around a little bit. MCG's flat, SCG spins, and Perth is bouncy.
Well, I think that India are definitely not going to pick three spinners, but I do think they'll pick Jadeja and Ashwin. I don't think you can drop Jadeja. His runs are too valuable and he provides a level of control. Ashwin is just Ashwin. He is at the top of his game, one of the best spinners of all time, and he's great to have in that team. I think India, the bit where I'm a little bit worried for them is how much energy have they got in the tank, how much fuel have they got in the tank for their fast bowlers? Like Bumrah is going to have to take quite a lot of the load on. Siraj is brand new to Test cricket. Yadav's probably going to be out. You kind of don't not bowl in the second innings, so it's going to be interesting. I'm not sure if Ishant is going to be fit enough to play the third test. So,
I don't think so. I've not heard anything that suggests he will, apart from people on Twitter sort of begging for him to come back, which is not usually a great source of information. So you think bearing that in mind, do you think Australia will have an easier time of it in Sydney, and you expect them to do well?
Yeah, I think with Warner coming back, I think that's a huge bonus for them. I think if it doesn't really. I think sooner rather than later, Steve Smith's going to hit some runs, and Marnus Labuschagne.
That's usually what happens with Steve Smith, isn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't tend to have extended dry spells. Yeah. I would be stunned if he finished the series averaging 2 or whatever he's averaging at the moment.
Yeah, so I think, but cricket's a weird thing, right? Momentum definitely does exist on this, but Australia didn't use it at all for their thing. India really did bounce back, so it's a funny old game. I look forward to looking forward to the next one. But I think if Rohit Sharma is back, that is a huge boost. Potentially, you get 100 runs there, more than likely in, but probably over 2 innings. It'd be really interesting. I think Australia though are going to be too powerful for them. I think their bowling unit will come to the front, and it will probably out bowl India's.
Yeah, I mean, I generally reflect that. I think it was a great performance by India in Melbourne, but I don't know what the chances of them all being able to repeat that calibre of performance are again in Sydney, and again maybe one more time. I think so much went right. So Steve Smith got no runs, Labuschagne got basically no runs. They had Joe Burns opening the batting. Like, those 3 factors alone are probably going to change. Like, Warner's a huge upgrade on Burns. You can't see Smith and Labuschagne failing or not doing anything for another test. The bowling unit of Australia is excellent, and so that will be consistently good. And from India's perspective, I do wonder somewhat where the runs are going to continue to come. So, I mean, in the first innings of the Melbourne test, without Jadeja's runs down the order, it's probably a different game. He stuck around and what did he get, 60 or 70? A lot of those runs with Rahane. I don't know if their top 5 has somebody who necessarily will be able to stand up over the next 2 matches.
Yeah, we'll step forward Pujara.
Well, I mean, he's the one, isn't he? If we're saying that Labuschagne and Smith haven't really done it yet, Pujara hasn't done it for India yet, so he's maybe the factor that can help India. Mm-hmm. But I do think overall Australia just have a little bit more in all facets of the game when playing in Australian conditions. So I do expect Australia to win at the SCG. But India have shown that they're better than I thought they were away from home, to be honest.
Well, I'll still be rooting for India. So I'm turning into quite the India fan, especially when Kohli's not around. Viva la Rahane is what I'm going to say. All right, well, that kind of sums up that. We'll cover the next test on the next podcast. Where do you want to go next? New Zealand or South Africa?
I need a glass of water, so how about we take a short break and then we'll come back and we'll do both of those. New Zealand, Pakistan and South Africa v Sri Lanka.
Bonanza.
Let's move on then to the other match that took place in the Antipodes, and possibly the biggest piece of news in the World Game this week. In true cricket podcast style, we've gone with what's popular, but I think when cricket historians or whatever look back over the game in a decade or 100 years, or whatever, this news will be more momentous than Rahane's century and so on. I am, of course, talking about the new team at the top of the World Test rankings, New Zealand. Ross, what do you think about that?
Thoroughly deserved, I think. I think for the last, 2 years especially, they've looked incredible at home. But just like most Test teams do, they seem to win at home all of the time. But their lineup is brilliant. Everyone knows their roles. Obviously, the heartbreak of England winning the World Cup is still ingrained in there. But for Test cricket, they look incredible. And they've got a level of commitment that I just don't see in some of the other teams, and that was personified by Neil Wagner's fractured toe and him then bowling his heart out to take 2 for 50. So I'm very impressed by New Zealand.
Yeah. I mean, so New Zealand, they made it to number 1. I think they needed Australia to lose a test, and they needed to win one. And obviously, the stars aligned, and they got one over their old enemy when they did eventually beat Pakistan in the first of the 2 tests they're playing against each other. They left it pretty late. They won by 100 runs. On the last day, though, it took 85.3 overs of the scheduled 90 for New Zealand to take the 10th wicket they needed. Pakistan starting that day 3 wickets down. So it was reasonably attritional stuff. Should we roll back a little bit earlier in the game, though? Because I think we mentioned him a little bit earlier in the show, but this win once again was set up by their talisman, their captain and their leader, Kane Williamson, who reeled off another 100, was involved in a couple of century partnerships on day one as well, and really he set the game up for New Zealand by lunch on day two, if not before. He's really in the form of his life, isn't he, Ross?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because there was a bit, about 2 years ago, where it was kind of Veracoli, Steve Smith, Kane Williamson, Joe Root was kind of put in there by England fans, which is fair. Joe Root I think he scored the second most runs over the decade in Test cricket, so it's pretty good going from Joe Root. But it's quite interesting now where what that level is, and it seems that Virat Kohli's gone up a level, Steve Smith's gone up a level, but Kane Williamson has been consistent throughout. He's as you say, he is their leader, and he is different gravy for me. He is currently, in my head, probably the best batsman out there. If there was to be one person I want in my team in Test cricket, it is Kane Williamson.
That's a bold statement. I mean, I think based on the last couple of months or so, if not year, he really has been the business. Anyway, so New Zealand they reeled off a load of runs, and then they bowled with like this. In my notes I've compared it to an anaconda-like bowling performance. Pakistan basically couldn't score a run. I think at one point they were 5 down for 80 or 52 overs, or it was something in that ballpark. I mean, eventually Fahim and Rizwan got together and they broke through the 2 runs and over barrier late in the innings. But I mean, if Williamson and Taylor and Latham and Blundell are the batting unit that's so devastating at home, you really have to praise this bowling lineup. I mean, it's basically 4 pacers now who are all really hard to get away and all also a threat. Kyle Jamieson's taken this bowling team or this bowling core to a slightly higher level, and I think we were just talking about Australia and how good they are. I would say this New Zealand pace attack might be the best in the world. Is that hyperbolic, Ross?
I don't think. I think, like I said, that I think the key bit in any team sport is for everybody to know their role and be able to nail that role consistently. I think they could do with a better spinner. I don't think Mitchell Santner is the best spinner in the world, but again, because of the way the others bowl, he gets the opportunity. He has a bit of leeway, really. I think the only thing on the downside is similar to England's is that Tim Southey and Trent Boult are they're increasingly older, aren't they? Especially
that's
Tim
what happens
Southey.
with age, isn't it? Yeah, it just keeps going up.
Every day they get older. It's unbelievable. But for this, it's just going. Well, I think Tim Southey took his 300th wicket in Test cricket.
Yeah, I think it was. Yep.
So they've clearly got class, and I mean, even Kane Williamson was throwing down some twirlers. So they're a pretty good unit. I think they might struggle potentially if they went and played in kind of India or Pakistan. I think actually playing on those surfaces, you'd need something a little bit different. But actually going to play in Australia, going to play in the West Indies, going to play in South Africa or England, they're going to be a pretty handy prospect.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. So after they bowled well, I mean, we probably should actually mention a couple of good Pakistan performances at this point. So Fahim and Rizwan, they did manage to get Pakistan beyond the follow-on mark, which looked out of their reach. What did I say? They were 80 for 5 or something like that. New Zealand, I think, probably would have batted again anyway, and they did. And it set up a game where Pakistan either needed to score 370 odd over 4 sessions, or they needed to bat out 4 sessions. It didn't start that well for Pakistan. They ended day 4 3 wickets down, and I think at that point most people had written off Pakistan. But again, another good Pakistani performance. Fawad Alam with his Chanderpaul on steroids batting technique. Managed to score his first century for about 4,500 days or something like that in Test cricket, and took the game to the final 5 overs. What do you think of Pakistan's fight there? Were you surprised that they did stick around?
No, I think we're fans of Pakistan on the show. We never know what's going to happen with them, and we love that lottery approach. Mohammad Rizwan I don't know, he's impossible not to like. I think he's just got that energy behind the stumps, and he's got just something about him where he's a bit of a fighter, and we saw that when England played Pakistan earlier in the summer in 2020. So not surprised, and if you've got such an elaborate and kind of extravagant trigger as Fawad Alam does, you've got to have some pretty good talent to back it up, I think. And it was nice to see actually someone, I think it's 88 test matches that had been in past between his first one and the latest one. So fair play to him, really. But ultimately, it wasn't enough, was it? So
just to back up that kind of Rizwan point, he's a bit mad, I think. Apparently, when he went out to bat with Alam on the morning of day 5, the plan that him and Fawad Alam spoke about was to each face 250 to 300 balls each and then see where they were, which is a pretty bold statement. When you're just walking the crease, it's not let's do this and over at a time. It's like, no, we're just going to look at the bigger picture. Face 250 balls each, and let's not even talk to each other until we've seen 250 balls each. Like and you know what? I mean, it was a big plan, and it almost worked. Santner though did manage to sneak the final 2 wickets. I mean, this is massive, really, for New Zealand to be the top Test team in the world. It's the first time in their history that they've managed it. How deserving of it do you think they are, Ross? I mean, are they? I think it's fair to say they're probably the best ever New Zealand Test team. Where do they rank among some of the more recent number ones that we've seen? If we go back to say, let's say, go back to England in 2010. So over the last decade, how good are this New Zealand team?
Yeah, I think as I touched upon earlier, I think that everyone knows their role. I think they've got some great players in there. I'm just not sure about the longevity of it. Like all these things, it does run out. But I don't know. When it comes to if you were to put the 2010 England side, I think they'd beat this. It'd be a good game, but I think they'd beat them. I think the Australians of the early 2000s would beat them, etc. They're not going to go down as an all-time great side. And I also think they are helped at the moment by kind of some of the other teams going through a period of transition, potentially. I think England are kind of in that position. Australia also. India have been pretty good over the last few years as well. But I think the big difference here is that New Zealand don't play 5 Test series. They play 2. They play 2 or 3. They can pick up those points, and it's a little bit difficult. I think we need to see them playing more Test cricket and see what they're really about. So unfortunately, though, doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. Yeah,
fair enough. I think some of their recent form as well is built upon them absolutely dominating Asian teams at home. So I think, I looked this up earlier, I can't remember exactly how many years. It's almost 10 years, I think, since a team from Asia came to New Zealand and won. And in the last 12 months, I think they've played Bangladesh at home, India at home, and now Pakistan at home, which are all winnable. Well, clearly, they've got a massive advantage there. I mean, the question now, I suppose, is if New Zealand do make the World Test Championship, which is a possibility. I think they need a few results to go their way, but they're gonna keep winning. I would imagine they'll win next week again against Pakistan and really keep the New Zealand train rolling. If they are able to make that final at Lord's v either India or Australia, do you think they have a chance of winning it?
Absolutely, I do. I think a lot of their players are coming into they are in their prime, and I think they would have a good chance of winning it. Did you see that Australia have been docked points in the World Test Championship?
I hadn't seen that. No.
Yeah, so for their slow over rate against India, they've been fined. All their players have been fined, and they've been docked points in the coveted World Test Championship. So advantage India.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And that's New Zealand. Should we move on to the final of the last of the 3 tests that we mentioned at the beginning of the show? Sri Lanka or South Africa v Sri Lanka.
Yeah, we should. And this was a test series that was in doubt, right? Because South Africa had kind of ballsed up the coronavirus stuff against England. Is it being played in Sri Lanka or being played in South Africa?
It's in South Africa. Yeah, that was the problem. Was Sri Lanka had doubts about how secure the South African bubble was after England went home. I think, as it turned out, England's positives turned out to be false positive tests, which probably reassured Sri Lanka. And I think South Africa committed to the no barbecue approach, which they didn't against England, and was one of the factors that they think let them down in the COVID department. Anyway, that that no barbecue approach does appear to be paying dividends, not only in terms of no positive tests for the South African or Sri Lankan teams, but in terms of performances on the field for Sri Lanka, for South Africa as well. The nice thing, and we say this every time we talk about South Africa, it's a much more time zone friendly part of the world to play test matches. So I was able to watch, as you probably were as well, I was able to watch a fair chunk of this game. And at one point it was set up to be a really good test. I think at the end of day one, Sri Lanka were 340 for 6, maybe even a touch more. They were really going along, almost 4 and over. Or if not slightly over, and it looked like Sri Lanka had turned up to play. Unfortunately, they suffered 2 quite important injuries. So they lost De Silva, the all rounder, who marked probably to bowl a fair chunk of the Rovers, and they the names escape me, but they lost one of their bowlers. I think maybe one of their opening bowlers. Very early into the South African innings, and this basically meant that Sri Lanka didn't have a bowling unit. So even though they posted 400 and they looked like they might be quite a formidable opponent, they were kind of powerless to stop South Africa piling on the runs once South Africa had got a foothold in that innings. I think really their only chance of winning or even getting a draw from the test was to bowl South Africa out for like 200 or something like that, and that didn't happen. Faf du Plessis, probably the story of the game. He notched his highest ever test score before falling on a heartbreaking 199. Ross, were you sad to see Faf fall 1 run short of that coveted double century?
I wasn't actually, because he did what every single one of us who plays kind of amateur cricket has done in their past. It looks like they're going to do something like either just about to get your high score or something like that. And what does he decide to do? Decides to come down the way. Here's the opportunities to hit a single and get that landmark of 200, and he comes down to a spinner and gets stumped. I think it was, or just
he chipped it to mid on.
Yeah, booted one of the air, and it was such an amateur dismissal. It was kind of just reassuring, I think, a little bit. So thanks for that, Faf.
Yeah, it was a bit annoying. So I'd watch that because, if someone's going to get a double century, you watch the test, even though the test was effectively over at that point. So I spent maybe an hour or 2 hours watching Faf slowly get to 200 for him to throw it away like that. I was a little bit like, come on, man, that's like do the right thing there.
At least it wasn't the slowest thing in the world, was it? It was still nearly 200 off of 260 balls or something. So
yeah, it was a reasonably brisk 200. It helped obviously because he was batting against people who just weren't bowlers. Karunaratne came on to bowl, the South African captain, the Sri Lankan captain. He's not a bowler.
He is not a bowler. I'm just looking through. I'm looking through these figures here. You got Karunaratne 6.5 going for 36 and going over 5. Kusal Mendes going at 5.86 off of his 7.
He was trying to bowl leg spin, but I think it might have been his first ever go. It was pretty hard to watch. I mean, from the positive point of view. Sri Lanka, they racked up basically 400 in the first innings, which is good. If you're a batting team, 400 is the benchmark of a good side, I think. If you're able to consistently do that, batting first, you're going to be in a lot of test matches. And their debutant leg spinner, Hasaranga, took 4 wickets in the only South African innings. He went for a load of runs, but he still took 4 wickets, and got a bunch himself with the bat in the second innings. Although the game was lost, it's still a reasonable debut from him. And I think there are some reasons for the Sri Lankan team to be optimistic. It's not all doom and gloom. If you lose 2 bowlers on a flat pitch, you're always going to be in a little bit of trouble, aren't you?
Well, I think they're probably licking their lips at England coming. I think it's a good little sign, really, for them.
Right. So that's all the Test cricket we've got for you this week. Unless you can think of anything else, Ross.
No, I think it's a good roundup. It's great to see that Test cricket is being played, and I think it's always great to wake up, as I said earlier, and actually be like, oh, what's happened in the world of cricket, and it's great content for this podcast. So obviously keep it.
Yeah, I think they were 3 in their own ways, 3 quite good matches. I mean, India v Australia probably will take the headlines, but New Zealand getting to number 1, winning with 4 overs left in the day, and the South Africa game maybe slightly less good, but had some talking points. We will take another short break, and then we will be back with the ICC Awards of the decade, which sounds exciting.
We love hearing from our listeners, so please follow us at The Cricket Pod on Twitter and Instagram. Or if you have a great story, like Scotty G did, about the Hayden Way, Matthew Hayden's personal website, we want to hear about it. So from wherever you're from, send us in a great story and we'll read out on the show. Email us on thecricketpod@gmail.com. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so the ICC Awards of the decade, just to clarify this, it was from January 1st, 2011 to October 7th, 2020 is what the bracket is. A bunch of awards that we're going to just quickly rattle through, and then we're going to go through and, 1, highlight who the winner was, 2, highlight who the nominees were and be like, oh, actually, who could they really deserve it a little bit more? And then go through the teams of the decade for the men's cricket in ODIs, tests and T20s. So let's start with the first one, which is the male cricketer of the decade, or I think it's the Sir Garfield Sobers Award. So this is for performance across all formats. Unsurprisingly, Jack, Virat Kohli won this.
Yeah, you could you could have guessed that was going to happen, I think.
Yeah,
he's bowled so well in the last 10 years that.
As Crickfizz will tell you, he swings it more than Mitchell Starc, so it's pretty impressive.
Right, yeah.
So
we do. He also bowls about 80 miles an hour slower than Mitchell Starc. So,
Virat Kohli, much to the chagrin of some fans who don't particularly like him, he scored over 20,000 runs in that time.
He had a pretty good decade.
Yeah,
I think by any measure, that's a good decade.
he had a good decade out, as they'd say. That's what it said. Just to kind of break that down across the 3 formats, in Test cricket he averages 53.6, in ODI cricket it's 61.8, and in T20 cricket it's 50.3. I mean, if they're your numbers, you're over the fucking moon, aren't you?
You would be disappointed not to win Player of the Decade if you'd put that body of work together, I think.
And obviously, he's captain. He's won a number of different trophies, including the Champions Trophy, etc. But there was a couple of people
No,
who...
he didn't, did he?
Yeah,
Pakistan won that.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
In 2013?
Oh, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe wrong. I thought he hadn't won anything.
Oh,
anyway, yeah, so he's either won a trophy or he hasn't.
Well, fair enough. But we got the other nominees were Ravi Ashwin, who we're obviously fans of the pod, Joe Root, Kumar Sangakkara, who retired in 2015. So he was that good that he played half the decade.
Good half decade.
Yeah, good half decade. Steve Smith, A.B. de Villiers, and then Kane Williamson. So you got obviously the big 3, as we talked about earlier, or the big 4, if you like, and then the Messiah himself, A.B. de Villiers. But I kind of think that it's probably fair enough that Kohli actually wins this one.
I think across all formats, he has been the best. We like to laugh at Kohli, and I'm sure somebody on Twitter will let us know whether he's won that trophy or not in very polite terms. But he is a phenom.
Yeah,
he is a phenom, and it really has been the decade of Kohli, I think.
Well, if it's been a decade of Kohli, the next award, or the next 3 awards actually, mean it has been the decade of Elissa Perry, who
oh my god, yeah,
who not only picked up the female cricketer of the decade award, but also the ODI and T20 awards as well. There's no comparison here. She is by far and away the world's best female cricketer.
She scored more than 4,000 runs and taken more than 200 wickets in the decade. Either one of those is pretty good. To be honest,
to do both, she is different gravy. Elissa Perry, and there's not really much more to say on it. That she is just so far ahead. And that Australia team is so very strong with her Meg Lanning's in the side as well. What England would do for Elissa Perry?
Yeah. Indeed, I think another deserving winner. If it's the decade of Kohli in men's cricket, it's definitely the decade of Perry in women's cricket.
It is indeed. Let's move on to the rest of the categories kind of focus on the male game because Elissa Perry's won everything. Steve Smith has picked up Test Cricketer of the Decade, playing 69 Test matches, scoring 7,040 runs at an average of 65.79. Unfortunately for me, I've seen 350 of those runs in person. Like sitting there watching that man bat, and he absolutely, and he didn't hit all of those runs against England. But I've got a bit of trivia for you here, Jack, and I've got a question for you. Which England player did he hit for 6 to bring up his maiden century in 2013-14?
Oh wow, 2013-14. Who? Monty Panesar.
Incorrect. It was Jonathan Trott.
Oh right.
So
you weren't going to get that in a million years.
Yeah, the old medium
Wow.
doublers of Jonathan Trott smashed straight back down the ground. I think if you look at Steve Smith over that time, he's been incredible, right? He started out as a leg spinner, wasn't good enough to back it as a leg spinner, came in. I think he only got his place in the side because someone hadn't done their homework, if I remember that correctly. Like there was some weird...
Sounds like a Steve Smith thing to do, yeah.
So anyway, but yeah, obviously England stalling the side for the last decade has been incredible. There was a couple of other people though who would potentially have taken this. I mean, you've got Harath from Sri Lanka, Kohli again with his great record, Roots have been pretty great over the last decade as well. Yasir Shah from Pakistan, Kane Williamson, and then obviously Jimmy Anderson.
So I had a look at the nominations, and I did think Anderson had a reasonable shout. He has been excellent for basically a whole decade. The reason I think you probably go with Smith is that Smith, numbers-wise in Test cricket, appears to be the best batsman since Donald Bradman. Whereas I don't think, even though Anderson has been great, I think Anderson has peers. I think Dale Steyn, probably unlucky not to be on the list of nominees for player of the last decade.
Yeah, Stuart Broad as well.
Stuart Broad, not a million miles behind. And even, I mean, it's a smaller sample size, but even like Pat Cummins has had a good few years towards the end of the decade. So I think on the basis of Steve Smith being a freak, you have to give it to Steve Smith. Although it is unfortunate for Anderson, because I think in a normal decade where someone hadn't done something like bizarre, basically, you could give it to Anderson.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I listened back to the Gerard Kimber podcast we did a couple of weeks ago, it was around in Test cricket, it's around the bowlers hunting the batsmen, and whereas in T20 cricket, it's about the batsmen hunting the bowlers. And I kind of think Steve Smith was coming up against some pretty good bowling attacks as well over that time period.
Yeah, I think this has been a hard decade to bat in. If you look, you can look statistically at batting averages and so on. 2000 to 2010 was a pretty easy decade to bat in. This has been harder than anything since back to the 60s or something like that. It's been a tough decade to bat, and to be better than anyone since the dawn is extremely good.
Yeah, especially when you're having to bat with personality legends such as Dave Warner at the other end. You're doing pretty well. Okay, let's move on to ODI cricketer of the decade. Virat Kohli, unsurprisingly, with his 208 games, 10,388 runs at an average of 61.83. And I'm not sure, like, his average when chasing is even better than that.
Yeah, I think it's obscene. He's an obscene player.
Yeah, so... I mean, and there's some great names in the nominee list. Got MS Dhoni, Malinga, Rohit Sharma, Stark, AB de Villiers, and Kumar Sangakkara. Just to chuck him. I think the ICC were just like, oh no, we like him. Go on, let's chuck him in the list.
Isn't he the head of the MCC or something like that, or whatever it is?
Yeah,
so
he was. Yeah.
They probably need to keep him sweet.
So, but again, it's just nobody comes close to Virat Kohli on this front. He's an absolute freak and has helped India kind of get to that position. What I did find interesting about that is that the best team in the last decade has been England, really, in ODI cricket, or at least for the last 5 years.
Yeah, I agree with this. I had a look at this and I thought it was odd that nobody had made the list. I think maybe because it's a decade thing, So who are England's best players? One, they're a little bit of a team, but if you'd say bowling wise, maybe Jofra Archer. Well, he's played for a year, so he can't be on the list. Batting wise, there's a few that have a shout for it, but Buttler is probably the number one. I think he made his international debut in late 2013, so he hasn't got a full decade behind him. I still think, and I would be happy to argue this with someone, that Buttler should be on that list over Dhoni. So I had a look. If you want to put a wicketkeeper on there, I know Dhoni averaged his 50 over the decade. He has a great decade of work. But Buttler averages 40 at a strike rate of 125 or something insane like that. He's playing at a super elite level of modern cricket that Dhoni frankly isn't. And if you've seen Dhoni play in the last 5 years, you'd see that he is playing an older form of ODI cricket. So I think I would argue for Buttler to be on that list. And I think probably unfortunate not to be.
Yeah, and as a bit, when we look at the ODI team in a couple of minutes, it'll be a case of also Adil Rashid. Adil Rashid has been one of the key bits of that England lineup and why they're allowed to be so good. And he's nowhere to be seen on that nominee list. So let's move on to T20 cricketer of the decade. And that is Rashid Khan of Afghanistan, taking 89 wickets. And his debut was in 2015, so he's taken more wickets in 5 years than anyone across the decade. He's a pretty phenomenal player, as demonstrated across all franchises, I think, across the world. However, he has played against some nations quite often that aren't exactly going to be able to play people like Rashid Khan. No offence to any of our Irish listeners on here, but there's no one in Ireland who even is comparable to Rashid Khan who is learning how to play spin like that. So he's got a bit of an advantage there. However, that's not to take anything away from him. He's demonstrated at the World Cups. Aaron Finch, Chris Gale, Virat Kohli, Malinga, Rohit Sharma and Tahir were the other nominees, Jack. I thought it was a bit unfair that this didn't actually go to Lasith Malinga.
I think there's a reasonable argument for it to have gone to Lasith Malinga. I think, in general, a T20 International Player of the Decade award is hard to hand out because a lot of the players that would be in the running for it get rested for T20 Internationals because people take them slightly less seriously a lot of the time. And, frankly, a lot of the best T20 cricket happens outside of the international game. So you talk about Adil Rashid's record against Ireland and so on, and obviously that does improve his international figures. However, he's still pretty good in the IPL. I mean, I think what I'm arguing for is the T20 International Cricket Award of the decade to actually just be the T20 Cricket Award of the decade because so many franchises play. It's probably the highest form of domestic cricket. I think you can include it in there, and I think, bearing all that in mind, Rashid Khan still has a good shout to win the award. I mean, I looked at the stats of the other nominees. None of them are particularly fantastic, really. I mean, Kohli's got a high average, but but he's. I don't think you say he dominated the T20 international game. I think it would be better to look across the top franchise leagues as well as the international game for that. And if you did, I think probably the actual best player of the decade is Chris Gale.
Yeah, Chris Gale has been phenomenal, hasn't he? Really, and even he's only played 34 matches and yet still scored over 1,000 runs at a strike rate of 141.9. So yeah, he's pretty good. Yeah.
Anyway, that's what I think on that. I mean, but I'm not disappointed with it. I think the other thing with they classify, if you want to get nerdy about it, the ICC classify T20 internationals slightly differently. So all T20 internationals count the same. It doesn't matter how far down the rankings you go. And if you're going to do that, you have to kind of accept that a player from Afghanistan might take 50 wickets against Holland, Ireland, UAE, I don't know who else, like that category of team. Because they play them more. If they were playing 5-match T20 international series against England all the time, then it would be great. But that's not how the calendar works. So I think you're kind of in a situation where a guy who takes 89 wickets in half a decade and averages 12 with the ball sort of demands to be picked as your player of the decade.
Yeah, 12's not a bad thing. Okay, let's move on to the Spirit of Cricket Award. Unsurprisingly, so I just want to understand the voting for this. So it's a bunch of journalists. I think 90% of the votes go to like journalists and board members or whatever, and then 10% of it goes to fans. So it's unsurprising that Veracoli has won this. No, I'm joking. It's MS Dhoni has won the Spirit of Cricket Award for calling pod favourite Ian Bell back out when he was run out when he thought he'd hit a boundary in 2013.
Yeah, he walked off for lunch too early, basically. And the ball hadn't gone for 4, and yeah, I don't know if he thought it had or if he thought over had been called. Wherever it was, there was a bit of a mix-up. Probably Bell should have been out, but people booed a lot, and Dhoni let him carry on batting, and now he's the best Spirit of Cricket person of the decade.
I think it fits, right? It fits as well. The ICC also recognised that their brand, and Dhoni's been a massive part of their cricket's brand for the last decade as well.
So you're saying he had to win something?
He had to win something. It's like
he had to be in all the teams, and he had to win something.
Yeah, it had to be one of those things where he's like the manager's son. Like that's the bit here. Like he had to go to the awards night, and the manager had to be like, "Oh, I can't not show my son that I love him so much at this award ceremony." So there you go, MS Dhoni. The other 2 awards were for Associate Players of the Year in Carl Kurtzer. I'm definitely saying that wrong, and Catherine Bryce, both of the Scotland national teams for both male and female. Let's move on to the teams of the decade, and this is where I'm just going to run through the list, and then I've got 4 or 5 people who I think that should be in each of those. Let's start with the Test. Alistair Cook and David Warner opening up. Kane Williamson at 3, Veracoli at 4, Steve Smith at 5, Sangakkara in at 6, Ben Stokes, the best number 7 you're ever going to see in Test cricket, Ravi Ashwin 8, Dale Steyn 9, Stuart Broad 10, and Jimmy Anderson 11. It's a pretty formidable team, that.
It's not bad. It isn't bad.
Yeah,
you have to say that's pretty handy lineup.
Yeah, there's.
I mean, that whole almost everyone on that team averages 50, apart from Cook and Stokes. Stokes is batting 7. Cook opened the batting in England, which is worth probably 15 runs on your average, to be honest.
He's also the most runs of any opening batsman, right? Interesting here that there's 4 people that I think are definitely there or there, but they're in the squad, I reckon. These guys are in the squad.
Okay, yeah.
Hashim Amla, he's definitely there.
Yeah, there's a reasonable shout for Hashim Amla.
Joe Root, who scored the 2nd most runs in the decade in Test cricket, doesn't find himself in that side. I'm not sure who would be in there ahead of, though. You could have...
No, he wouldn't be.
Yeah, you could have Sangakkara opening up instead of Dave Warner, and you could have Joe Root in there, but let's not go into the... Yunus Khan of Pakistan, who's been a stalwart of their batting lineup for pretty much the last 60 years, actually, Yunus Khan. And then, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but Nathan Lyon has been phenomenal over the last decade for Australia. So
better than Ravi Ashwin?
Not better than Ravi Ashwin, no.
No, well, that's the. I think that's the problem with Amla and Root. They have had great decades and great careers, but if you're 3, 4, and 5 are Williamson, Kohli, and Smith, it's really quite hard to get in there. I mean, maybe you shuffle around Sangakkara, but then you haven't got a wicketkeeper, so you're gonna have to pick a wicketkeeper.
It is tough. But I think that one is there or thereabouts. If I'm perfectly honest, I think they've actually done a pretty good job.
I would agree with that. I like that team.
ODI, we've got Rohit Sharma and Dave Warner opening up. Virat Kohli in at 3, AB de Villiers at 4, Shakib Al Hassan at 5, MS Dhoni at 6, Stokes again at 7, Mitchell Starc, Trent Bolt, Imran Tahir, and Lasith Malinga. What are your thoughts on this?
So on this one, until I saw his name down there, I on the nominations for there are a couple of inconsistencies here, aren't there? Before you do your bit between the players of the decade and the players they've selected for the team of the decade. Am I right in saying Sangakkara was a nominee for ODI? Player of the decade. He doesn't make the team, which is a little bit harsh. I think Shakib Al Hassan was probably unlucky not to be nominated for Player of the Decade, as he basically is the Bangladesh team.
Yeah, but I think this comes down to an ICC branding thing. They can't be associated with someone who's been done for match fixing or not reporting match fixing.
Well, they'll happily make Steve Smith their Test Player of the Decade, despite him sitting out a year for tampering with the ball. I don't understand.
I mean, everyone tampers with the ball, but it's still cheating. Dave Warner's in both these sides, so who knows what they're... Who knows? But what I also found interesting around this is that there's not too many England players in it. And again, like I know we are England fans. I know this is we record this in England. But I think Adil Rashid is a better spin bowler than Imran Tahir.
I think there's an argument to be made for that. Imran Tahir did have a few good years. I'm not completely write him off.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Then you've obviously got some of the ODI batsmen. I mean, Johnny Bairstow has been incredible. Owen Morgan has been incredible over that time period. But then also someone like Ross Taylor from New Zealand, who actually doesn't find himself in any of these sides, but is also played 100 games in each format. So
he's been pretty good. He has been pretty good. I mean, I think, and I'm sorry, India fans, I think the obvious one is MS Dhoni for Joss Buttler, if you were going to make that team better. And I don't know if you need Stokes batting 7 in your ODI team of the decade. You could maybe switch Stokes for I don't know, another batter or something. But it's not a million miles away. It would be pretty competitive, I think, that team in a World Cup.
Yeah, you've got too many bits and pieces players in there, have you?
No.
Anyway,
quite a lot of personalities. I can see there being some big time dressing room bust ups.
Oh yeah, they've said that ODI Coach of the Year is Kevin Peterson, actually, so he could lead that. And then, let's move on finally and wrap up the show after this one. Is the T20 team of the decade. Rohit Sharma and Chris Gale opening up. Aaron Finch at 3. Virat Kohli at 4. AB de Villiers at 5. Glenn Maxwell at 7, is that? 6.
Yep, 6.
And then MS Dhoni again in the T20 side here. Kieran Pollard, Rashid Khan, Jasprit Bumrah and Lasith Malinga. So this is where I do have a couple of different things here. So over the decade, obviously the West Indies have been just different. Like they were incredible. They won 2 of the World Cups.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So I think it's a bit harsh that someone, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, that Marlon Samuels isn't in this side. Marlon Samuels
I actually thought that myself, that it was a bit harsh on Marlon Samuels that he... I think Marlon Samuels, the problem with him is his star shone too bright for too short a period of time. And I think this is the nature of T20 in a sense, is that it doesn't... In an individual game, and if you were building a team, you don't necessarily want the most consistent players. Mm-hmm. So do you necessarily want Virat Kohli in your side? You actually want Marlon Samuels. People who can do insane stuff. They just don't do it every single game. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily love this. I mean, I think the bowling, but the 3 bowlers are all right. I don't know where the rest of the bowling's coming from. Pollard's in as the 4th bowler in that team, and then I presume Glenn Maxwell is going to bowl.
I think they might be thinking that Chris Gale could bowl his twirlers as well here.
That's a bit thin on the ground. You probably want to sort that out.
So I've got a couple of people who are missing here. So obviously there's Joss Buttler, who I think should be in the majority of this, but Shane Watson has been incredible over the last
Shane Watson
decade.
should definitely be in there. Shane Watson should be in there above Rohit Sharma, I think.
And then out of all of this, and this isn't me just going on to the different parts of the internet to find it, because we've got Indian fans, we've got a bit of balance with Pakistan fans, but where are the Pakistan players? Like, where are they?
Where's Babar Azam? Babar Azam was like best player in the world for 2 years, and we're going to stick Aaron Finch in at 3.
Yeah, so he's not there. You've got Umar Gul, who is still ranked, according to the ICC rankings, as the best ever T20 bowler. Nowhere to be seen in any of it, not even a nominee. Shahid Afridi, like Mr. like boom boom, and he's not here. I think Pakistan could be sitting there going, do you know what? They buy straight into the BCCI have got their fucking mitts all over this, and I think they're a bit hard done by.
Yeah, I don't think... I mean, having 4 India players in the T20 international team of the decade is wrong.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally wrong. And you're too light on West Indies players, and you're probably too light on Pakistan players.
Mm-hmm. But at least MSW's
yeah.
in there, right?
At least, but more wise Tony there.
Just give AB de Villiers the gloves. It's fine. But anyway, it's, as you said at the top of the show, it is beautifully free content for this podcast, and it's one of those things where I'm glad they've done it because it's good to recognise some of these talents. I just wish there was. Maybe not more categories, but maybe some better thinking goes into it next time. But never mind. We'll see what happens in 2030.
Yeah, great. I think that pretty much wraps up everything we've got for this show. We will be back again next week, maybe slightly earlier next week. We'll see. Thank you very much for listening. Ross, is there anything our listeners need to be reminded of one more time before we end the show?
Follow us at The Cricket Pod on Twitter and Instagram, and leave us a review and share with a friend on iTunes or any podcast platform.
Great. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back soon.
Goodbye.